Hi. Now we're back and we're talking about TPACK. So TPACK is the acronym for Technology, Pedagogy, and Content Knowledge. And you'll see how this is used. So it's based on the work of Mishra and Kohler and goes back to the early 2000s, but it actually was based on work talking about pedagogy and content quite early on in like the 70s and 80s when we talked about how pedagogy had to match content and the idea that you just getting up in front of a classroom wasn't going to work. So TPACK is a really great model. It's a really comprehensive model. It's been studied quite a bit. It's very well researched. It has lots of data that supports it. And the major components of TPACK are pedagogical knowledge, which is how we teach, content knowledge, which is what we teach, and then technology, the knowledge of how to use technology appropriately. And then they overlap, looking for this sweet spot, which is what they actually call it, which is what TPACK is. You see this nice arrow here. Now, all of this is placed within the context here of the classroom. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. TPACK is TPACK.org is this amazing website which gives you all the information that you could want on TPACK, and it's free and sponsored by a great professional organization called SITE, which is the Society for the Inclusion of Technology in Education. So, TPACK, to break it down, the T is technology, and it is everything from pencils to Blackboard to your Chromebook to your smartphone to the Elmo that you use if you use recording devices, online resources, whether you have an overhead projector or an Elmo. All of those things are the technology in your classroom. The pedagogy are things like whole group, small group, think, pair, share, stations, task cards, student-directed learning, project-based learning, the concept of metacognition, having them think about their learning and what works best for them. And content is really anything we teach, and each of these on this list have their own content, have their own sub-content. So if we look at ELA, we're looking at reading, writing, speaking skills, which is part of the Common Core standards, math, and all the components of math and all the subjects of math for those of you especially who are in teaching secondary, science and all the sciences, earth sciences, life sciences, social studies including history, geography, psychology, sociology, and all of those, health, computers, library, and physical education, but there are maybe others as well. It's just whatever it is you are teaching. Now, the important part of TPACK is that it is within context, and I think that's a really important piece to remember in all of this. And you want to look at when we talk about creating a TPACK framework for our lessons, we're talking about who our students are, what's the objective of my lesson or the goal of my lesson? What's my teacher training? Am I really skilled at using this technology? How do I feel about it? Because we know, and you know this from some of the reading you've done, teacher attitude is hugely important in the use of technology or the use of any kind of particular pedagogy. And then what's the experience like? So what's the experience that we're going to do? What is the background your students have? Have they gotten prepared for this experience? Have they built up to using the technology or participating in a hands-on experience? And then again, what is your own experience as the teacher? So context is hugely important and not often talked about, but I think it's very, very important. Now, there are less versions of the TPACK model than there are of the SAMR model. However, there are a few, and many of them combine SAMR and TPACK together. And this is a blended ladder. It's done by 3 teachers, Gravel, Mika, and Soger, and this note here will link you to their blog spot. I think it's Soger's blog spot. And it's interesting. What they say is they like to look at SAMR as a ladder. I'm not as fond of it in the idea of it being a progression, but I don't really see it that way, but they do. And the way they look at it is you use TPACK as your base and then build off of that TPACK base, strong foundation. You create your experience according to SAMR. And here is their example of that. And it's actually, I think, a pretty good example for an elementary classroom. There also is the Punta Dora explanation of TPACK. Punta Dora talks about TPACK and blending it. And sometimes you'll see TPACK as TPCK. They just take out the A, just the and. And I think for him, he really says technology is the base of TPACK, and I like that. I think it is the base that you use. If we're really focusing on our technology, then let's that be the base. And then augmentation, substitution, the SAMR components are part of that base. And then your pedagogy and content can come out of that tool that you're using, as opposed to it being being up here in the model at the top and being something that you're sort of striving for. And again, that really what you're looking to get at is that middle point, that sweet spot of teaching and learning. So this is an example that I've given you, and that example actually comes from my class that I taught up until a few years ago. I taught 4th grade, and my 4th grade classroom was in this particular lesson that I did. I had 23 children. It was an urban school. It was a Title I school. Oh, it'd be nice if I spelled that right. It was an inclusion class. I had EL kids. I had kids with different learning challenges. We also were a center for ASD and ABA, so I had kids that had spectrum disorder. So I had quite an interesting mix of learners, and they were all, it was one of this was one of my last classes I taught in one of my fave groups. And we had done a lot of work with technology over the year. And we read a book called The One and Only Ivan by Catherine Applegate. And we read it in ELA, but we had been studying animal habitats in our science units. And so we used that. And if you know The One and Only Ivan, it's a great elementary book. And the animals that are featured in that book are a gorilla and an elephant. And so those animals were the animals that I was interested in having them create sanctuaries for. So my content was both the ELA, knowing the book, and then also knowing what animal habitats were. And then depending on what small group they were in, they became experts on gorillas or they became experts on elephants. And since those are 2 really interesting animals, it was really easy to get the kids excited about it. And they also super liked Catherine Applegate's book too, because it's a really good one. My pedagogy was small group. I used leveled readers. I had some science material that was leveled for them. It was project-based learning, and in the end, my students were going to be creating presentations for parents and the school and information that they could share with local zoo, which for us was the Roger Williams Zoo, which probably is local for some of you too. So that's my PK, CK, and in the TK component, that's where I bring in SAMR. So up here is that sweet spot where everything came together and everybody learned. But to get there, I actually did use technology hitting each part of SAMR, and I kind of didn't realize that until after the fact. And I'll be honest, as a teacher, I knew SAMR, but I didn't know it very well, and I definitely didn't know TPACK. But I see now how it worked and how I wish I had had that framework when I was planning some of my more sophisticated lessons using the technology that I had in my room. So, and later when I was a coach using it with teachers. So for substitution, I used iPads for reading books, and we typed on Macs. For augmentation, students used the iPads and Macs to research about elephants and gorillas by shorthand, and watched videos to support their learning, and they found experts through the websites. So they needed that technology to do that. The modification was that students used FaceTime to talk to experts at the Roger Williams Zoo and to use PowerPoint to create presentations. But the redefinition came when they created, each group created their own book using Book Creator app on their iPads to write up and illustrate their planned sanctuaries, and they created iMovies from their visit to Roger Williams Zoo, and those were all part of their later presentations that they shared with at an open house night. So this is a really successful project, a many weeks long project. So that's it. And now you're on to the work. So what you'll find at the end of the page on Blackboard is that you'll find this model again, but with all of my scribbles taken out of it, and you can fill it with your own scribbles, and it's a shared doc, so I'll want us all to see each other's work. So what I want you to do, it's not graded, but it is part of your participation for the class, and I want us to share, each of us to share a lesson that we've done and kind of break it up and see where you get on this model. You may think of a lesson you did that you used technology and it worked really well, but you didn't hit each part of SAMR, and that's okay. It's really okay. And there may be times when you see that you don't maybe have as much under pedagogy, or the content's a little bit, the content's probably always going to be quite rich, but the technology might be just a simple, we used iPads for something and we're really only here in the substitution or augmentation range, and anything and everything is great and acceptable. What I want you to do is get your minds around these models and how they are useful in the classroom as a way to, I think, because let's face it, as teachers, we don't have time to do this kind of planning, right? Take out a model and fill in all the circles and rectangles. But I think what it does is nudge us as practitioners to use a higher level and a higher level of technology and use it in a more sophisticated and purposeful way. So that's it for now. I'll talk with you all soon.